So I'm Susan McKeown. I'm the director of Khambule Foundation, and I lived most of my adult life in the United States. And for a lot of different reasons, I came home and started this organization here in Ireland after spending years abroad. And it also operates in New York on the Lower East Side in Manhattan and in Los Angeles. Over COVID, we weren't able to do a lot of cultural projects, but it was through that work that we got involved in the refugee resettlement of a number of Afghan refugees. But tonight we're going to share with you some of the projects that we haven't shared publicly before, and they were projects that we did in the lead up to COVID. So I just want to read you out just a paragraph about what Khambule is. We work with communities to heal trauma and cultivate belonging. We co-create new systems of community healing that center youth, women, and Indigenous culture. And the youth I'm talking about are young adults, 18 to 26. Our collaborative approach views mental and emotional distress in the historical and social context of racial and economic justice, recognizing that in healthy, whole communities, every voice is essential and needed. We facilitate older teens and young adults to develop talents and learn new skills through cultural projects that revitalize and expand community knowledge and practice, connecting people more deeply with themselves, each other, and the place where they live. And as you know, tonight, this is going to be a presentation about an introduction to Irish culture. So before we dive into that, I'd love to ask you to think about what the word culture means to you. And we're going to share a word map. There'll be an opportunity here for you to put in the words that come to mind. And it's a good opportunity to introduce Rachel and Madison, who are working the Zoom tonight.
All right, so here's our Jamboard. And the question being, what does the word culture mean to you? We've got a couple of stickies in here. If you want to click on a sticky and type your response, please feel free to do so. You can also use the chat feature if that's easier for you, if you're on a mobile phone or something like that. And also, if you're feeling very bold, go ahead and take yourself off mute and you can share it that way as well.
So that's great. Mary, you've already shared culture is the beliefs of a group of people. That's wonderful. It's lovely to think about. There we go. Look. Thanks, Sebsile. Culture are norms, traditions formulated around group convictions. Beautiful. Oh, Lisa, thank you. Beliefs, behaviors, norms, and customs. Great. This is so rich. Culture is the total way of human life. I love that. It's lovely to have these definitions. And expressions of what culture is, because it varies for many different people. And that's the sound of my dog's paws. Oh, there's some sticky notes. Great. Culture are the values and beliefs in a community. Thanks, Suku. Culture is the way and belief of people. Thank you, Precious. That's beautiful. And I've been thinking, obviously, a lot about culture with this presentation, because all my life I've been very fortunate to be involved in Irish culture and live in America, expressing and thinking about Irish culture and how it's expressed, and then feeling in my heart different feelings about how it was to grow up in this country. So thank you, Lucky. It is the way we traditionally do things as a community or a group of people. Richmond, thank you. Culture is the social behavior of a particular people or society. And Funmilola, Thank you. Culture is the way of life and your belief. Exactly. So we've got so many things there. Rachel, can you can continue collecting those, and that's lovely. We'll have a map of all the different expressions of what culture means for us. It is a tradition way of individual way of behaviors. And in all of my journey and thinking about culture, I think for me, it's most like maybe Lucky's, because for me, culture has come to mean how we pass the time together. Culture means the value and belief of a particular society. Thank you, Francis. Yeah, it's a group of people, what they do together. That's lovely. And gives me an opportunity to tell you about one of the projects we recently completed in Inchicore in Dublin. And it was a community folklore project. So we collected all the stories, and it was young women who went out and collected the stories from their different families and neighbors. And we had a really rich series of stories that we have on a podcast on our website, where it says, listen. And it's a really diverse community there. So we had an incredible array of rich customs and stories from different groups, different cultures. Mary, thank you. The ideas, customs, and social behavior of a particular people or society. Nilufar, culture is the soil that we grew up in. Happy Nowruz. I was thinking about that yesterday, and the beautiful Nowruz traditions from Persian culture. Nashma, thank you. Culture is ideas and social behaviors of a particular society. Mary Juliana, thank you. Culture is our traditions and beliefs, the way we dress, our food, our dance. Together it forms our culture. Abosidi, culture is a way of life, our dressing, language, religion, and art. Yeah, both of you mentioned dress or clothing. And of course, yeah, when I was thinking back on the roots of Irish culture, like all cultures, people spent most of their time figuring out how to get food or cooking food or making clothing. That was mostly what people did, and made beautiful ways of, and individual ways of dressing and making clothing and making foods according to what was available to them in certain places. Ehuo, culture is a way of life that defines a group of people. Exactly. This is great. Now we have that beautiful map. Thanks, Rachel. Rachel, I take it you're taking everybody's definitions and putting them in there.
I sure am. Yep, I'm
fantastic.
Taking them from the chat and putting them onto the board.
That's wonderful. Now I can tell you a little bit more about the other workshops we're doing, and then we're going to ask you another question. And then we'll move on towards the presentation. We have a couple of short films to show you too. So this is the first of 3 educational workshops, empowering asylum seekers adapting to life in Ireland. And my idea for the introduction to Irish culture was telling you some stories. Some you will know, you'll recognize much because you've been here even a short time, you'll recognize certain aspects of it. But there are things here that even the Irish people I know living on the island don't know about our roots, because of the waves of different cultural influences that have come on in more recent centuries and been very strong. So for me, this is a very exciting time in Ireland, because it's a time of recovering some of the earlier traditions, even now, 100 years after the foundation of this state. And that's a very important timeline, 100 years, because we've got a lot of anniversaries happening in Ireland. And having grown up here, craving change, wanting change to happen for decades. It's happening now in a way I had never seen in my life. And I think that's why 10 years ago, I felt I needed to come home because I wanted to be here, and things have just gotten better and better. The change is here. It's already, things are changing so much that I'm very glad for this change in this country. So tonight is an introduction to Irish culture. Next Wednesday at the same time at 8 o'clock is Ask Your Asylum Questions with Lucky Khambule from MASI and Niloufar Omidi. And Niloufar is present tonight, and she was the lead author on the Know Your Rights document that I know was issued by a couple of human rights NGOs, and MASI immediately put it up on their website, so it's accessible on the website. And if you have any questions that you want answered anonymously or otherwise, you can email them in advance and we will share them with Lucky and Niloufar. And we will have those questions answered and some more conversation about issues for asylum seekers at this time. And then the third workshop the following week is well-being, how to cope with fear, anxiety, depression, bullying, and more with Lucky Khambule, Ejiro Okbavone, who is the founder of Black Therapists Ireland, which she founded over a decade ago, and Niloufar Omidi. So we'll have a conversation with some presentations from Niloufar about resources and what's available and services. Ejiro about well-being, a presentation about well-being, and from Lucky, he'll be reprising a presentation he gave through MASI before about managing fear and other emotions when living in direct provision. So I think we can move on. It looks lovely looking at this. What does the word culture mean to you? And of course, this is recorded, so we'll be able to access it later and put this up on the website. And I did want to ask you now, from your experience, what words describe your impression of Irish culture? I'll just be quiet for a minute. What do you think of Irish culture? It's complicated. Any observations about, Irish culture or anything you know about it? Yeah, thank you. Samkwa, Ricardo, thank you so much. The Irish way of living or doing things. Exactly. And what have you seen about the way, what is the Irish way? The people are friendly. Incredible, hypnotic, engaging. That's lovely.
They are family oriented. They believe in family, and they believe in especially the male has a very great respect for the woman, which I have absorbed, and there is a great coordination between husband and wife, and they love big families, and they have a lot of children and lovely children. So I think the culture is family-oriented culture with very kind and welcoming nature towards those who are not Irish. This is my feeling for them.
That's lovely. I'm so glad that's your experience. Family-oriented. Wow, this is
Thank
beautiful.
You.
Irish culture is the best, I would say, to my opinion. Family-oriented, Joy, echoing what you had just said. You have observed, men's respect for women. I'm just writing down what I remember from what you said. These are really valuable. They have warm reception. Irish people are accommodating and very friendly. Irish values one another and respect for their elders and families and family members. Also value communication. The Irish are great talkers, it's often said. This is very beautiful. Thank you so much. Welcoming and loving. God-fearing. Really nice, and always have a way of saying jokes that make someone feel welcomed, warming, and sometimes like the Irish weather. Yeah, the Irish weather. That, you know, there's an expression we have in Ireland, there's 4 seasons every day. You might have heard that, because things can change throughout the day. It can be like it was sunshine here in County Wicklow in Bray this morning, and then it rained in the afternoon, but it is lovely that being an island on the Atlantic, the weather blows through. Irish culture is the beautiful reflection of the blue ocean and the green nature of Ireland at the mirror of Irish people. That's beautiful. The most caring people who don't mind reaching out, even in public places, no matter where it is, tram, Dublin bus. This is lovely to hear of your positive experiences of Irish people. You know, I did a tourism study, because when I came back in 2013, I went back to college and studied Irish culture in a business course. And it emerged that most people who come to Ireland come here because of the people, because of Irish people. It's seen as our greatest resource. That the people are seen as friendly and warm and welcoming. Children's rights are very much observed, with good reason. There is great. Children are very much valued. So we may move on, if that's all right. Is that all right with you, Rachel? You're working very hard, recording all of these. Thank you so much. And this has been great to see. And now I'm very excited to show you a film from a project we did in 2018 with people who were living in St. Patrick's Centre in Monaghan. And when we went there, as we have with a lot of projects, we arrive and ask people what they want to do and create the project right there. So we had a very little time, very little resources. And we looked at what people, what life had been for people in Monaghan thousands of years ago. What were the early values of the people who first came to Monaghan? And we went to the local museum and discovered what was there. And we made this film to tell this story that Madison's going to let us see now. Thanks, Madison.
I just need sharing ability, sorry.
Oh, yes, sorry. There we go. Yeah, I was at an event the other day and somebody said when it was something about sharing. Anyway.
Fado, Fado, gods and goddesses, of the tribe of Danu came to Ireland in dark clouds and landed on the mountains in the west. They were a supernatural race who came from the stars in the four directions of the sky. And they were known as Tu'a De Dana.
As soon as they landed, they burned their ships so that they could never go back. The fire from the ships brought a darkness over the sun for 3 days and 3 nights. They were a fairy people, and they brought with them their skills in the sciences, architecture, the magic arts, druidry, knowledge, and prophecy.
Brought with them 4 sacred tools of power: the sword of light, of the element of the air and the east, the sphere of the lung, of the element of fire and south, the cauldron of the Dagda, of the element of water and the west, the Leofair, the stone of destiny, of the element of earth and the north.
4,000 years ago, cotton were used here in Monaghan to feed families and communities. The cauldron were crafted with the forged fire and held the water, the source of life, found in the secret wells, rivers, and lakes. It is said that no company ever went away from the magic cauldron of Dagda unsatisfied. Daughter of Dagda was Breed, great mother of children, poetry, healing, wisdom, divination, and prophecy. Her name is on the hills and fields and scarewells. She lays her garment down and it spreads over fields as far as the eye can see.
She reminds us to close our eyes and go within to be with the source of creativity. This is where you can make the change within that is needed to change the world outside you. In the silence, we can be gentle with ourselves and understand that we are on a journey with great challenges to make us grow. There is no end to us. We are limitless.
Thanks, Madison. And I hope you enjoyed that film about the project we did in 2018, and with very little, and everybody brought their wonderful talents to the project so that we could make that small film just over a few days. So we look forward to doing more projects. So now I'd like to give the presentation that I've prepared and tell you a little bit more about Irish culture. So you saw in the film and that project that we did in Monaghan a few years ago, an early story about one of the groups of people that came to this island of Ireland long ago. Early Irish history is full of stories about groups of people arriving on the shores of Ireland. And this is called the Brighter boat. It was found on a farm near Derry over 120 years ago. So in the north of Ireland, very near the north coast, it was found, this small gold boat with a gold bowl and some jewelry, and was made about the 1st century BC. So it's over 2,000 years old. And this and a few other things we talk about can be found in the National Museum of Archaeology in Dublin, which is free if you want to go in and look at some of the national treasures. So one of the groups that came, as you heard mentioned in the film, was the Tuatha De Danann, the tribe of the goddess Danu. And in that film, we heard the description of them as a supernatural race who arrived in Ireland in dark clouds and deliberately burned their ships so that they could never go back to where they had come from. Now, when the Tuatha De Danann reigned in Ireland, it was a golden age of beauty and joy. They loved art and philosophy and music and song, something for which Irish people are known even today all over the world. And this next photo of an item also in the National Museum is a horn called the Loch na Shade horn that was found with 3 other horns in a bog in 1794. So that's over 220 years ago. A bog is a kind of wetland, and in Irish, the word bog, it's bug, it means soft. So in this case, it was once a lake, and the word Loch na Shade means lake of the treasures. That design you can see in the lower right photo is on the bell of the horn. That's what it's called, where the sound comes out. So that disc with the design on it is actually the design we use for the logo of Coola Foundation to symbolize the voices and stories we want to empower to be heard through our work. Now, a lot of people will say that the Irish are Celts, but the Tuatha De Danann were here before. The cauldron was one of the 4 sacred tools of power that they brought with them and symbolized hospitality and taking care of people. The Tuatha De Danann did not want to engage in battle, so when the Celts arrived, they were a warlike people who loved battle and material things. The Tuatha De Danann withdrew into the land itself, they say, making their dwelling places in the grassy mounds and ancient hills, beneath thorn trees and stone circles. And as the Tuatha De Danann went underground, the feminine nurturing qualities in Ireland were suppressed, and the Celtic stories appear of heroes and honor and glory and fighting to the death. Now, this cauldron dates from around 800 BC and was discovered in Monaghan in 1854 in a bog under 14 feet of bog in a place called Listrum Turk. And that's why they call it the Listrum Turk cauldron. Now, this is an example of a Bridget's cross. Of course, you know about St. Patrick's Day, but there are 3 patron saints in Ireland, and one of them is a woman, Bridget, or Breege. And she's known as a saint, Ireland's only female patron saint. But while she is known to have lived in Ireland in the 5th century, we know that there was devotion in Ireland and other parts of Europe to a goddess called Breege for many centuries before. And we know that this goddess, Breege's mother, was a slave of the tribe of the Tuatha De Danann, and she was raised by a druid or holy man. And the name Bridget means strength or high, and in this case it refers to a high hill or a mountain, and she was a powerful goddess of the land. And this Bridget's cross is a version of the sun wheel and reminds me of the story of the Tuatha De Danann, who came from the 4 corners of the sky and brought with them 4 sacred tools of power. And Bridget's feast day is February 1st, one of the 4 fire festivals that mark the quarter days of the year and honor the earth and the connection between the living and the dead. And in Ireland, there are wells called Bridget's Well all over the country, but this particular one is in Faughart, County Louth, which is the birthplace of Bridget. Bridget's Day is the festival of Imbolg. That's the name of the ancient festival that came before, which means in the belly, literally Imbolg. Bulg is belly in Irish. And holy wells are found all over Ireland, and the wells are held sacred because the water is held sacred. and the water stems from the womb, the bullock or belly of the earth. So bullock can also refer to a bellows that a smith uses, a blacksmith. And Bridget is the goddess of smithing, healing arts, fertility, poetry, music, prophecy, agriculture, medicine, and fire. She's the goddess of fire. And of course, her name again means on high. And that's where the fires were lit, on the quarter festivals and other certain times of the year, but particularly those 4 fire festivals. And here's a shrine by St. Bridget's Well. And there are shrines in many other parts of Ireland. They're places where people bring offerings. And in this case, to this holy well, they've brought pieces of cloth, coins, medals, photographs, prayer beads, crosses, personal items. And they do this to remember the dead and often to ask for help and healing. And I thought I might just say a little bit about place names, because on the MASI meeting the other night, I heard a lot of these place names beautifully pronounced in gorgeous voices. So I just thought I would tell you a little bit about place names, because they tell a lot about the beliefs of the people who lived here before us, who saw the land, the mountains and the rivers and held them as sacred and saw the earth as a mother. Sometimes you'll find a feature named after a woman or a part of a woman's body or a holy person, or something descriptive about what that place was like long ago, when people worshipped in woods, at trees, at holy wells. And in Ireland, there was an early form of writing and an alphabet connected to nature. So here are some of the meanings of some of the places. You might recognize Ballahadreen, Ballach on Dareen. And so that's the way of the little oak wood. Dareen is a form of Dura, which is oak. I mean, the city of Derry means oak. And if you go across to the right and see Kildare, Kildara, that's the wood of the oak, Quill, Dara. And then in Mayo, we have Ballyhaunis, Bail Aha Haunish. That's the ford of the opening of the approach, usually referring to a river. So identifying a place where people can cross or meet. Balseskin, Balya Sheshkin Balya is a town or townland, and Sheshkin is a swamp or bog. There's a bog again. Castlebar, Cashlon on Varig. I don't know what Varig means, but Cashlon is castle. Clondalkin, Cluan Dulcon. You might know Clontarf, so that's Cluan Tariff. So Cluan is a meadow or pasture. In this case, Dulcon is thought to mean somebody's name, so it's Dulcon's meadow. And in Clontarf, Tariff is bull, so it's the meadow of the bull. Kildare, we talked about before, and then Letterkenny, Litter Cianan. Litter is hillside, and Kenny's probably a man's name. And Roscommon. Ross is a wooded height, so a wood in a high place. And come on, I don't know. I couldn't find what that means. Again, it might be a person's name, because people were well remembered in the names of places. And we had an older form of law here before the Vikings came, before the British came, before all the invasions that came later on. But for a long time, we lived with these laws. A Brehon was a kind of judge, and we had these laws that people lived under quite peaceably, a civil code based on the decisions of the judges or Brehons and guided entirely by an oral tradition. So it wasn't written down. You had to commit this all to your memory. The laws were concerned with the payment of compensation for harm done and the regulation of property, inheritance, and contracts. And although Irish society under the Brehon laws was male-dominated, women had greater freedom, independence, and rights to property than in other European societies of the time. Fasting outside the home of a wrongdoer was a custom practiced to shame the person into repaying a debt or righting a wrong. And people have always pointed out that this is similar to some traditions in India of justice and bringing community justice. Some of the other laws were that, as you can see here, the law of farms, which protected people's rights to take care of their own land, their own wood, and what was on their land. And there were harsh penalties for taking of human life. Human life was held valuable and sacred. Men and women held their property separately, and divorce was accepted as a fact of life. So a divorcing couple could each take what they owned at the time the marriage contract was made. A rapist had to pay a heavy fine, and if a rape resulted in pregnancy, the perpetrator was responsible for the rearing of the child. He had to take responsibility, and no shadow was cast on the woman. So then there came a period of monastic settlement in Ireland with the coming of Christianity. So that was a time when the first towns really were established in Ireland, monastic villages where people worshipped. They were centers for culture and learning. And we know that Irish people living here at the time valued the land and the universe we lived in, and they valued knowledge and learning. And the Druids are said to have a completely oral practice. So everything that they learned, they had to store in their memory. We know that the Irish welcomed the arrival of Christianity because the metalwork and design skills of the Iron Age were incorporated into many religious pieces of art, resulting in a new and distinctly Irish or Celtic design. Art in the following centuries would be primarily produced for religious purposes, with iconic creations such as the manuscripts known as the Book of Kells. So this is one of our most famous manuscripts. It can be seen in Trinity College today. It's an illuminated manuscript in Latin, and it contains the 4 Gospels of the New Testament. So after the collapse of the Roman Empire, when so much was lost all over Europe, Irish monks traveled all over Europe, bringing manuscripts made in Ireland so they could spread teachings that had been lost after the fall of Rome, but preserved in Ireland. Up until the Middle Ages, in the 15th century, the harper was an important person in Irish society where music had always been valued. The old Irish harp was not easy to play and required long fingernails in order to play the wire strings. No Gaelic monarch or high noble of the period would have travelled far from his castle without an entourage that included a bard, known as a filla, who composed elaborate verses, a vocalist or racara who read or sang the poems, and a harper, a critera, who provided musical accompaniment. Tunes that they composed in honor of their patrons were called planksties. And this time was truly a golden age for harpers, and they were viewed as very important and indispensable by their lords and patrons, and treated as highly valued members of the household. Some harps were magnificently carved and studded with precious gems. So then in the 10th century, we started to see the arrival of the Norsemen or the Vikings, who came to Ireland looking for plunder and slaves with knowledge of seafaring. They created the first trading centres in Cork, Dublin, Limerick and Waterford, and married in amongst the Irish. And when they would come plundering, they would often plunder those monastic settlements and take off with jewels or gold or silver, whatever they thought would be valuable. And then the next wave were the Norman people, or the English. The first wave of Norman English settlers was in the 12th century. And they concerned their fellow countrymen at home when they settled in well. And the saying that we know today was said about them that they became as Irish as the Irish themselves. So it started to, concern the British monarchy. So a little while later came the second wave of the English in the 16th and 17th century. And that wave was bloody. There was real fear at that time that Ireland would make allegiances with foreign powers, that enemies of the English would be invited in to attack England from Irish soil. And so the English responded to their own fear by taking over more of Ireland and colonizing Ireland effectively. So this began the Tudor conquest and involved imposing English law, language, and culture, and confiscating and redistributing those monastic lands. Catholicism was outlawed, and the Protestant Church of Ireland became the state religion. Many of the Gaelic aristocracy fled in 1607, and that left the way open for the plantation of Ulster, which established a large Protestant population in the north of Ireland. Now we're looking at the second Great Seal of Elizabeth I. You can see the harp in the top right. So this was the earliest English Great Seal which bore an Irish harp as a sign of the union of the kingdoms. In the 16th century, Queen Elizabeth I issued a proclamation to hang Irish harpists and destroy their instruments to prevent insurrection. Around that time, we have a story written down from the Archbishop of Armagh, who was a leading royal councillor, and he rode 30 miles through parts of the east coast of Ireland without seeing or hearing a sign of life after Elizabeth's troops had gone through. Houses were burned out, villages uninhabited, all the cornfields destroyed. Nowhere were there any people or cattle, just an eerie silence. Famine reigned. And it reminds me of a book I saw when I was in an old library in Dublin City one day. And it was a book that was printed a few years ago, and it had details of a log kept by Elizabeth's troops in 1595 as they went through Ireland on these campaigns. And the diary entry for one day in April said, brought in the heads of 2 poets and a harper today. So that meant those musicians and poets had been beheaded, and this was common practice at the time in Ireland. So after that time came the time of Oliver Cromwell, whose name is very well known even today in Ireland. He led a brutal conquest of Ireland. He tried to establish a wild Irish reservation in Connacht in the west. And that's his famous saying, that the Irish people could go to hell or to Connacht. Cromwell was a Puritan who believed that people needed to be pure and live a good life, which in his opinion meant that festivities and enjoyment led to intoxication, sensuality, and indulgence. He banned music, theatre, pie, and even Christmas. He took the persecution of harpers begun by Elizabeth I to new extremes. In the 1650s, Cromwell ordered all harps and organs throughout Ireland to be destroyed. In Dublin alone, the authorities seized 500 harps and burned them. Harpers in large and small cities were forbidden to congregate. And yeah, he confiscated and destroyed food supplies during the campaign and moved the Catholic population to the west, to Connacht, and located English settlers in the other parts of the country. Many people were sent to Barbados, just rounded up off the streets, off the fields, from the villages, and sent off to Barbados. And about 20% of the population at that time died by starvation. And after that, we had the period of the penal laws. You can read them there. The penal laws were passed against Roman Catholics after the Reformation that penalized the practice of the Roman Catholic religion and imposed repressive rules on Catholics. There were fines and imprisonments for participation in Catholic worship and severe penalties, including death for Catholic priests. Other laws barred Catholics from voting, holding public office, owning land, publishing or selling Catholic books, or teaching. So a little later on, this harp, I know it's from 1822, but I just love this particular harp, so I chose this photograph. to talk about the Belfast Harp Festival, which gives an idea of how decimated the culture was. Because by the late 18th century, it was clear that traditional Irish harps were nearly extinct. And so with them, the rich store of harp music that had always been handed down orally was almost gone. So in 1792, in order to encourage and preserve the old harping tradition, a festival was held in Belfast, and newspaper advertisements invited all Irish harpers to come and play for cash prizes. Only 10 harpers, ranging in age from 15 to 97, could be found. But that is a very famous festival, the Belfast Harp Festival in July 1792, where much of the music was written down and recorded by a man called Bunting and recorded for future generations. So we have that today. And later again, we had the Great Hunger. Sometimes people refer to it as the famine. And while there was the failure of the potato crop, it's more recently known as the Great Hunger because there was lots of food grown in Ireland at the time. There was plenty of cattle and sheep that were, fatted and sent off to Dublin and to England and other places. So there was enough food on the island to feed everyone, but much of it was made inaccessible to the Irish population. Eyewitness accounts tell of conditions that were unspeakably horrendous, with countless parents and children clustered together in holes in the ground, with nothing to eat, nothing to wear, delirious with exhaustion and fever, just waiting to die. And that occurred from 1845 to 1852. Starving people were made to work on absurd schemes of public works, even when the famine was at its height. So they couldn't eat the potatoes. There was nothing left. They couldn't afford to buy food, and they literally died of starvation. And so as a consequence of that, there was massive emigration. So right at the beginning of the famine, we had 8.5 million people in Ireland. And in 1851, that number had fallen to just over 6 million. And then 20 years later, it's just under 5.5 million. And you can see that the population went down and down and down until 1931. And then it started growing again from 1931. So between 1841 and 1850, 49% of the total immigrants to the United States were Irish. And between 1845 and 1855, 900,000 Irish immigrants landed in New York. It was one of the biggest immigrant groups arriving in the United States and through New York at the time. So obviously now there's been a big Irish influence in the United States, and we still haven't gotten the same population numbers we had before the Great Hunger. So I do want to take a moment to talk about a new book called The Bad Bridges, because there's a unique aspect of Irish migration to the US, was that unlike all the other groups that came from other countries, the Irish were outstanding for one particular fact. They had huge numbers of single women traveling alone, and they were mostly aged between 15 and 24. So you would have had other groups where a man would have come and maybe he would have sent for his wife and children later or brought them with them, or you'd have a lot of single men. But the Irish had a lot of single women. And as one famous writer said to me some years ago, the truth was Irish women couldn't wait to get away. And many of them arrived maybe with the name of someone, and some people set up schemes where they could get training and they would be learning English if they didn't have it, because people still spoke Irish at the time in Ireland. And they would learn how to be maidservants or take care of children. And some of them had very successful lives. Many worked for many years and then went back to Ireland, but we don't hear many of those stories. And then some of them had very difficult lives because they left very difficult times, very difficult families. There was a lot of trauma. And so a lot of Americans would have referred to Irish maids as Bridgets. And so there's a recent book telling the stories of some of the difficult stories of the women, because here in Ireland, we know that the voices of women have been so silenced over the last hundreds of years that a lot of us are trying to reclaim those stories of the Irish women and the challenges they had in their lives. So another change that came after this period was a change in Catholicism. The dramatic population decline gave the Catholic Church more control over its flock, because a lot of the people who died and who left were the very poor, and the middle class was left behind, and many of them were much more devout. So from the late 1800s, there were also cultural groups that, for example, practiced Irish sports, and Irish cultural organizations emerged promoting hurling, camogie and Gaelic football, and Irish music, storytelling and traditions in theatre and in music clubs such as the Pipers Club that hosted regular gatherings of traditional music in the city of Dublin. So this was after hundreds of years of having to suppress, of, you know, cultural genocide indeed. So then there was this real surge of celebration of Irish culture in the late 1800s. And you can see this drawing of a man playing the fiddle for two young women, two young girls dancing at the crossroads. And that was something people used to practice a lot. Lots of people would travel to a crossroads from different areas so that they could all mix maybe on a Friday night and enjoy themselves. And this particular drawing is from a printing press that started in the early 1900s and published a lot of the artwork and writing of the Irish cultural revival that happened at that time. And in 1913, I just wanted to show you these beautiful photographs. And they were the first colour photographs taken in Ireland by two French women. The French women heard about a project called the Archives of the Planet. And there was a very wealthy man, a French banker and philanthropist called Albert Kahn, who invited people to send in photographs from different parts of the world for this big project. So these photographs were taken by these two French women in Claddagh and in different parts of the country, but these predominantly in this village of Claddagh, which is a fishing community in Galway. And they helped capture an old Gaelic culture that was that had been disappearing gradually, and it was kind of the last years where people openly practiced these traditional ways. So this photograph is of Mon Ní Tuathail, who grew to be a grandmother and had many grandchildren, had a happy life. And this was her in Claddagh in 1913, and she's wearing the shawl that she wouldn't have worn all the time, but she was asked to wear it for these photographs. And there she is showing off the traditional Irish shawl. And the colour red was very popular in clothing, in petticoats and shawls. And here's some women practicing spinning and making garments in the fishing village. And there's some young people outside the traditional Irish thatched cottage. And there's some more thatched, some beautiful examples of the thatch on the roof, and some fishermen in Claddagh in 1913. And then in 1916, we had the Irish Rising, or Easter Rising, where some thousands of people trained in secret societies for a few years leading up to this, because of course Ireland was still part of the United Kingdom of Great Britain at the time. But people were starting to say, no, we need to express our own culture and be ourselves and be our own country. We need to determine for ourselves who we're going to be. So in April 1916, about 2,000 people took control of buildings in Dublin and read what's called the Proclamation of the Irish Republic. And this was an event whose reverberations shook the British Empire to the core. Some historians say it was the first event that began the fall of the British Empire. This act of a small nation rising up against Imperial Britain was noticed by Vladimir Lenin, Mahatma Gandhi, and Ho Chi Minh. And in response, Britain sent in troops and ships, and after a week, Dublin lay in ruins. The leaders of the rising were rounded up and executed, and many of the signatories of the proclamation had spent formative years in New York. This is what Dublin looked like the week after the rising began. And about the proclamation, President Obama said, "I'm struck by how ahead of its time the Irish Proclamation was. It was a daring document, one which its authors were very particular to address to Irish men and Irish women. It's built around religious and civil liberty, equal rights and equal opportunities, and cherishing all the children of the nation equally. It's a universal value like the ones in America's own founding documents that compel us to look continually forward, that give us the chance to change, that dares us, American and Irish alike, to keep toiling towards our better selves." I'm just showing you here some music that was written by my great-grandmother in that year, and it was published in 1916 when the GPO, the General Post Office, was in ruins, but they have a beautiful drawing of the building here in great condition, obviously before the rising, with the Irish flag raised on top. So up to the time of the rising, that would have been a criminal offense. You couldn't fly the Irish flag, and it wasn't an official thing even. The flag had been presented as a gift in 1848 to an Irish patriot, Thomas Francis Maher, by a small group of French women who were sympathetic to Irish nationalism. They knew about the struggle, so they wanted to symbolize a hoped for union between Roman Catholics and Protestants. And so that's what the flag symbolizes. The green symbolizes the Irish Roman Catholics, and the orange symbolizes the Irish Protestants. So that flag dates back to 1848, but in 1916, we see the first time it's actually raised up and people start to write songs about it and become proud of it. So that changed everything. The rising happened during the First World War, and after the war ended, we had in Ireland the War of Independence in 1919, which lasted until 1921, and was a guerrilla war between the Irish Republican Army and the British forces. And let's see, after that happened in 1922, we had the Anglo-Irish Treaty, which was a treaty between Ireland and the UK that established the Irish Free State, an entity independent from the United Kingdom, but within the British Empire. And then we had the Civil War from June 1922 until May 23, a conflict between the right-wing militia in favour of a treaty with the British, leaving Northern Ireland under British rule, and those against it. So that caused, great death and destruction in the country, with brothers in the same family often taking different sides. So upon its foundation in 1922, the Irish Free State was embroiled in a civil war between nationalists supporting the treaty and opponents who supported the existing republic. The pro-treaty side was victorious in the conflict, won subsequent elections, and formed the government of the state until 1932, when they peacefully handed over to the power to the anti-treaty faction of the state until the anti-treaty faction, and that was Fianna Fáil, who defeated them in an election. And either Fianna Fáil or Fine Gael have been in power all the years since. The church, which has gained power in the aftermath of the Great Hunger, now stepped into a strong relationship with the state. And I'm going to give some examples now of how this relationship between church and state negatively impacted Irish society in terms of healthy human connection and celebration of life, and the life of Indigenous Irish travellers, and of course, the lives of women. So the first example I want to give is the 1935 Public Dance Halls Act. The proposals in the Act were based on the recommendations of the 1932 report of the Carrigan Commission into Juvenile Sex Crimes. in the early years of its effect, there was less tolerance of more recently introduced musical styles, such as Irish set dancing, which was seen as foreign, and jazz dance clubs. However, the Act also disadvantaged many traditional Irish musical activities, such as private house dances and crossroads dances, forcing spontaneous and social music and dance into a controlled and commercialized environment. The Act remains in force today with amendments. And then in 1963, we had the report of the Commission on Itinerancy. And this opened by outlining the terms of reference for the Commission, which included to inquire into the problem arising from the presence in the country of itinerants, which is what they referred to travellers as, in considerable numbers. And number 3 was to consider what steps might be taken to promote the absorption of travellers into the general community. And Article C said, pending such absorption, to reduce to a minimum the disadvantage to themselves and to the community resulting from their itinerant habits. Some of the recommendations included strengthening the law in favour of landowners and discouraging excessive tolerance and leniency by the courts. And if intimidation by travellers is proved, the culprit should be dealt with severely. The Commission rejected suggestions made to them that itinerants should be registered and issued with personal identity cards to overcome difficulties of identification encountered by the Gardaí in following up on crime committed by them. And I understand the quote from the Commission was, there can be no final solution for itinerancy in Ireland. And there's a beautiful colourful photograph of travellers in Ireland, the way they used to be able to live their true nomadic life with their traveller wagons colourfully painted beside them. And the third example I wanted to give was the mother and baby homes. So that's been in the news a lot in the past, since the 1990s, when these stories came out that horrified many, and yet many knew the truth, but had not spoken up in the decades before. And so young women who became pregnant were forced, in most cases, to go and live in these mother and baby homes if they were not married. And sometimes young women were forced to go into homes even if they didn't have children, and kept there, and if they escaped, the Gardaí would bring them back. But in these cases, those who had babies, they were in general made to take care of the child and then separated from the child at about 2 years of age on average. And sometimes the children were taken and given to adoptive parents, in fact, sold to parents who wanted to adopt them against the wishes of the mother. And many of the religious orders that ran these institutions forcibly kept information for the entire lifetime of the children and the rest of the mother's lives. So in many cases, they could never be reunited again. And even today, people are having difficulty finding out the identities and the stories of their very own family members in Ireland. And here we see just an example of infant mortality rates in Ireland, 1924 to 1930. The general infant mortality rate was at that rate, you can see in the green boxes per 1,000 births, and the kind of yellow colored ones are children born outside marriage exclusively, and you can see that they died at much higher rates because there was much less care given to them. So in terms of recent history, you can take a look at some of these events in recent history that have made Ireland a better place to live. So in 1985, we had the sale of contraceptives allowed. And in the 1990s, revelations of sexual abuse within the Catholic Church, the truth started to come out. The closing of mother and baby homes and other religious care institutions. State inquiries were launched. The reduction of religious involvement in education.
In 1996, divorce became legal in Ireland. In 1998, we had the Good Friday Agreement. In 2015, Ireland becomes the first country to hold a referendum to approve same-sex marriage. And in 2017, Irish travellers finally were officially recognised by the government as an Indigenous ethnic minority. And in terms of cultural change, just wanted to put in a couple of examples of great cultural change. In 1996, we had Riverdance, which was featured in the middle of the Eurovision Song Contest, which was a huge moment in Irish culture that Irish people were very proud of. And the lead dancers were both from the United States, from Irish American families in the United States. And another huge change is Gael Scoilina. That's Irish language schools have popped up all over the country, even in many parts of Dublin City, where children who go to school learn everything through Irish. And today, Irish language courses in the US are very popular in university. So apparently that's the area that has the largest number of people learning Irish are in colleges and universities in the US and Canada, in North America in general. And gradual improvement and expansion of funding for arts and culture. And another great thing that has changed Ireland is the arrival of large numbers of migrants. So thanks for sticking with me through this. I hope you enjoyed this introduction to Irish culture.
I just wanted to invite you, actually, we can put it into the chat, and then we're going to watch one more film and then we'll have the raffle. So the chat, we can put in, my question to you is your impressions of Irish culture now, if they have changed now that you've seen the presentation, and thank you for sticking with us all the way. And we'll finish with this film, and then we'll have the raffle, and Rachel or Madison will come on after the film and tell us who the winner of the raffle is, and we'll collect their, I'll be in touch and get their information afterwards and send out the gift. Again, thank you so much for coming along this evening. And here's a film about one of Ireland's most famous painters, an internationally known painter who's not very well known in Ireland, but he was born in Inchicore, which is where our office is, in the inner city in Dublin. And when he was born, his family was homeless. And his parents were taken into a house for about 4 months, where they lived in the cellar. And then they were asked to leave the house. And so they lived homeless for a while until they were taken in by travellers. And they lived with travellers for 4 years until they went to London, where he became very famous. So we did a folklore project in Inchicore that I mentioned recently. And Sean Scully told us this, and we made a short film about it to let people know about the value of travellers, because it wasn't unusual that travellers would take in settled people who had become homeless. So I hope you'll enjoy this, and you'll see some of Sean's paintings in it, and then we'll have the raffle. Thank you.
So here's the story. I think in 43, my parents were at a dance in Sheerness, services dance, and they met and they fell in love and they left the war, and then they had to undertake the perilous journey from Sheerness over to Ireland. It's not that easy, you know, because of all the activity in the Irish Sea and the vigilance too. They arrive in Dublin, in Inchicore, and they're on the street, and that's when the travellers befriended them, and they stayed with them on that campsite there. Then it became time to get me birth certificate, so that my mother knew that I wouldn't get one if we stayed with the travellers. So Dylan's at number 7 gave us the cellar room, 6 feet by 7 feet, and we stayed there for 6 months. And on my birth certificate, it says traveller. Nice, huh? I mean, I can show it to you anytime you want to see it. I might have a copy of it in there.
Maybe we can lay some claim to you now that it's on your birth cert that you're traveling.
It's as clear as day in black and white on my birth certificate. Yeah. It says profession of father, traveller.
Fantastic.
There it is. So we stayed down in the cellar for 6 months, and then, you know, you can't stay in somebody's house forever. So then we went back with the travellers again for about 6 months, I think. So in other words, the travellers were very hospitable to us, and I consider myself to be one of them. I'm very bonded. The people who just wanted to live free like people used to live before taxes, before, you know, sales tax, before passports, before censuses. The way the world was free. And the people that carried on living like that eventually got marginalized because there are all these fences everywhere. And people want to say, this is my land. Yeah. Even though everything's borrowed, including your body. We don't own anything. All we own is our spirit. That's the only thing we own. The rest is borrowed. And I've even made a painting called Traveller. I mean, these things are very deep, you know. I mean, we were on the run. I mean, I was born into criminality. There's people who are marginalized are kind. And they understand hospitality because they understand the lack of it. So they give it. I think it was a very natural thing, you know. And the travellers, you know, brought them in, particularly knowing that my mother was pregnant. My mother would walk across a field to the Golden Gate.
Golden Bridge.
Golden Bridge, yeah. Yeah, that one. And they would feed her, which produced me, of course.
The nuns fed your mother well.
Yeah, they did.
And that was in this house, Golden Bridge, and this was the nuns' chapel.
Yeah, and this is where I was baptized.
And I heard they used to have penny dinners in there.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Penny dinners.
The only thing is that they didn't have a penny. So they wouldn't have been having the penny dinners. So when we crossed, that's when my memory kicks in. And I used to have a dream of this man walking in front of me. And I kept having this dream all the time. And it was foggy. And then my mother said, yes, that's the crossing. The ship lost its radio, and all the crew were walking up and down with poles and flashlights because the whole sea was full up with mines, and it was a very hazardous situation. So then I made this painting called Precious, and then I made another one called Precious, which is a little painting inside a big one. And the little painting, of course, was me.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Madison. Thank you all very much.